This whole place is fucked. What have you cunts done here? Dave, get the Dexies out. Yo! Let's clean this place up.
Part 1. Identity. Ethnic, national and cultural identity has always been important to me. Talks about race in relation to identity has always been fascinating in my opinion. While I believe all talks about race should be understood as personal, not general, we definitely need to have honest talks about race. Ethnicity is an aspect of someone's personhood, not their whole identity. You are a person before you are an ethnicity. I feel like I'm lucky in the sense that most people come to my videos understand that fact. People come for what I say, not who I am. I know a lot of people nowadays hold the good faith misguided notion that... What is that? Fucking... what? I know quite a lot of people nowadays hold the good faith misguided notion that the only way to end racism is to stop talking and thinking about race altogether. While I heavily agree we need to stop reducing each other to categorical labels, we definitely should throw out the entire discussion altogether. I hope going forward I can make a good case of that. There is a really productive conversation in asking who we are and how does our individual identity affect us on a societal level. National identity is something that intertwines well with race. While ethnicity is tied to arbitrary features, national identity has a wider, more encompassing capacity. Unlike ethnic identity, national identity is metaphysical. It's a core set of values, ideals, philosophy, and a belief system, a sense of community, a national cohesive whole, as represented by distinctive traditions, cultures, and language. Ethnicity is to do with the personal, while nationality is to do with the cultural. In my opinion, Western Southern Hemisphere countries have a better grasp over this concept over the rest of the Western world. In online and RL discourse about who I am and what I am, I always introduce myself as Australian, because I quite like Australia and I'm proud of my birthplace. And the cultural identity of being an Aussie is a very easy mantle to take up. This is due to the fact that countries like Australia have a very brief colonial history, barely spanning more than 100 years. Unlike places, say Japan and Britain, where there is an intertwined ethnic, national, cultural concept for the native traditional people, Australia doesn't really have that. You can't be ethnically Australian, that's not how it works. Australia from its conception has always been a multicultural, multi-ethnic nation by definition. While they did try to make it an ethno-state, initially, yeah, they they really fucked it on that one. Thanks to cultural branding, being Aussie is just being Aussie. Even if cunts like ScoMo will tell you otherwise, it's almost universally understood Australian is a nationality, not an ethnicity. It's like the Batman thing. It's not just a person, it's an idea. It's a symbol. With that said, being Australian is a very fraught and nebulous concept. It's not perfect, but it does work and it does have good application. Going forward, I'm going to try and introduce you to some new strange concepts. Hey, these are strange times. It's the 21st century, okay? Gender, race, sexuality means absolutely nothing anymore, okay? Let the degeneracy begin. I'm also going to cover the topic of Indigenous education. And one quick thing I gotta disclaim going forward, I am neither Maori or Aboriginal, so with this video my intention is not to speak on behalf of any of those Indigenous groups. All I'm doing is regurgitating and reiterating Indigenous academics and scholars. Now, speaking of those said scholars...
It's far away.
Okay, yeah. So, hello everyone, I'm joined here by Michael Colbert, essentially...
Hello everyone.
Is that how you pronounce your last name? Or?
Colbung, C-O-L-B-U-N-G.
Colbert, Michael Colbert.
It's a West Australian name, Aboriginal name.
Aboriginal name, gotcha.
My name's Michael Colbung. I work here at the School of Education within the University of Adelaide Faculty of Arts. That'd be right, huh? Colbung, I'm a Wangatha, Nyunga, and Angania Data man.
What do you think you're doing?
2. Indigenous stuff. In this part, I'm going to analyse the topic of Indigenous education. Indigenous education specifically focuses on the teaching of Indigenous knowledge, models and methods and content within formal or non-formal educational systems, incorporating Indigenous ways of teaching into the current system while raising wider awareness for Indigenous historical culture. Going forward, I'm going to tackle the topics such as comparative education and how Australia performs poorly in its own Indigenous relations. This part will discuss the ideas raised by many academic sources and argue those points. Australia's Indigenous education system is far behind New Zealand's. I'm going to examine the differences in education, identification of implication and cultural framework of Australia and New Zealand. Also, this part will have snippets of my Michael Colbert interview that will give insight into the overall topic's perspective while giving a different accompanying perspective. So, on the topic of Indigenous education, what would you say what is the biggest hurdles currently facing Australia's Indigenous education?
Oh my gosh, how long have we got? There's a whole lot of issues that I'm currently trying to write about it. That, you know, you could look at the curriculum could be the problem. It could be teachers could be the problem.
Is it because it's not compulsory? It's an elective sort of thing?
Is that Indigenous knowledge or Indigenous studies or things like that?
It's not common knowledge, because when I went to school, I never learned anything about Indigenous education, really.
And I just had a big talk to about 50 teachers today, looking at the new science curriculum and the inclusion of a whole lot of Indigenous knowledges into the science space, you know. Okay. But then again, the invitation is there for teachers to incorporate it. Mm-hmm. It's not compulsory that they do it, but it's their invitation, and there may be the problem, you know.
In Australia, 649,200 people, or 2.8% of the population, registered as Indigenous, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander in the 2016 census. Yikes. That is not a lot for the native population. In the same year, the Maori population in New Zealand numbered at 723,500, or 15.4% of the resident population. While still quite low, it's evident from a glance New Zealand is doing far better right off the bat. Australia, when tackling the issue of Indigenous education, falls short in almost every way. Unlike New Zealand, Australia does not incorporate any of its Indigenous language into the education system. Australia doesn't teach traditional dance in school. Apart from land properties acknowledgement, Australia's Indigenous education is elective and not compulsory knowledge. Unlike New Zealand's education system, which is mandatorily taught, leading people to relate and understand basic Maori culture. New Zealand is far more advanced than Australia in its promotion of Indigenous culture, language and education. While there is far more cultural and linguistic diversity in Australia between Indigenous language groups than exists between Maori tribes, Maori language and culture has been successfully promoted in New Zealand by institutional arrangements that have put in a place to reflect and promote New Zealand's biracial nation. From primary to secondary school, the Maori language and culture are compulsory. Due to New Zealand's well-implemented Indigenous education, most residents are proficient in English and Maori bilingual language. Day-to-day life in New Zealand is consistent of greetings like Kira oke. I'm sorry, I'm gonna fuck this up, okay? I don't know any Maori. Kira oke, which means hello, and Hare me, which means welcome. Is that, if someone's actually Maori, can you please correct me if I think I butchered that. Lots of Maori language has been brought back from the brink due to the bilingual slang compulsory taught within schools. New Zealand's Indigenous education system cultivates a better cultural identity. Children in New Zealand actively want to learn Maori and want a deeper connection to their land, having a better cultural and national identity of togetherness. In my experience, I had a mate who was from New Zealand, and when I asked him about Indigenous stuff, his knowledge far dwarfed my own. Unlike New Zealand, Australia does not have a national treaty to underpin positive Indigenous relations. New Zealand's The Treaty of Whanganui, I think that's wrong, includes the national curriculum that thing, which provides a curriculum framework for schools to plan Maori medium learning programs. The treaty acknowledges Maori values, cultural identity, and student heritage and their respective families. The Treaty of Waitangi is a principle that underpins New Zealand's curriculum decision-making. Indigenous perspectives are always embedded across all learning areas. A prominent example of this would be within the social sciences, exploring the bicultural nature of New Zealand's society. We live in a society... Nope, concentrate. Also, on the other end of the spectrum, the arts education embraces Toi Māori, valuing forms and practices of customary and contemporary Māori performing musical and visual arts. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures aren't one of the 3 cross-curriculum priorities of Australia's curriculum. Learning about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures isn't embedded into any of the subject learning area content. While opportunities to teach and learn about Indigenous histories and cultures are presented to teachers through content elaboration, it's usually just tossed aside. If you're wondering why historically New Zealand has this underpinning treaty, it's because from a historical perspective, this is to do with how first colonial interaction was managed. The Maoris put more of a fight up while the Aborigines really didn't. That's why Maoris tend to have a better say in colonial governance, because they were actually afforded a treaty. Interesting fact, the Maoris were first to implement trench warfare when the British first came, and they were totally fucked up with that fighting style. It's really interesting. Also, they taught the British trench warfare for the following world wars. I don't know, I thought that was an interesting fact. Anyway, I feel like as members of Australian society, it is important to acknowledge the Indigenous language in day-to-day life.
Whereas some schools that incorporate the whole lot, they have really good successes in outcomes for not only for the Aboriginal kids but for the non-Aboriginal kids coming into that cultural space of working with diversity and working with people of culture.
Exactly. So a big thing that's what New Zealand has done, opposite to Australia, is that they've made a lot of their Indigenous education compulsory. So they've implemented a lot of their cultural values from the Maori people into their society as it is.
Yeah.
And do you think we should do something like that within like Australia? Because in like Maori, for example, they within schools they learn how to do the haka, and they do traditional dance, and they learn what land means, what not. And also they incorporate a lot of islander language. So a lot of like non-Indigenous people in New Zealand are bilingual.
Yeah, wherever you go, please acknowledge the local language and somehow learn some languages, learn some words, learn some greetings, basics, all that kind of stuff.
Taking the New Zealand model of Indigenous education with its compulsory teaching of Indigenous bilingual slang and transferring that into the Australian curriculum. Many Indigenous academics claim this will mentally decolonise further generations of Australians to have more of an inclusive national and cultural identity. New Zealand has made great strides in its Indigenous relations, constantly taking an ethno-relative approach to its own governance and education, acknowledging its messy and bloody colonised history of oppression while actively paving way for a more prosperous future. Juxtaposing that to Australia's approach to Indigenous education, the evidence by Akana clearly shows that it's quite lacking in approach and implication. From land rights, languages, culture and schooling, the Australian government needs to uproot and re-implement a new system that is similar to New Zealand's Indigenous education system. The Cape York Institute states, "There is no reason that Australia cannot achieve as much and more than has been achieved in New Zealand. We need to work together, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous, progressive and conservative alike, to come up with a package of reform to effect menial Indigenous recognition in Australia." This quote, I feel, summarises the whole discourse on Australia and New Zealand's approach to Indigenous education. It highlights the heights of what New Zealand has achieved while acknowledging Australia's journey ahead. Conclusively speaking, while Australia's government falls short in delving into the real meat of the issue, this is a long, deep-seated, immensely difficult task to undertake. Educators and legislators need to incentivize for a better education system, crafting a more successful, thriving environment where students can have a better Indigenous education. Going forward in Indigenous education, Australia should teach and learn its own local languages. Considering better institutional support for Indigenous languages with Australia's communities is a must going forward. Following in the footsteps of New Zealand, looking at the issue of Indigenous education with more respect and enthusiasm. Now I've given a critique of the subject matter's strengths and weaknesses, you're probably wondering why nothing has been done. Well, there's two reasons, the personal and the societal. Well, there's two big reasons in my opinion, the personal and the societal. The reason why anything really gets done under Western liberalism is to make capital. There is no monetary incentive for the government to help the Indigenous populace. Secondly, on the personal level, it's because talks about Indigenous education and Indigenous discussion in general is a reminder of pain for white people. Going to talks and lectures about Aboriginal issues, it takes no time to realise the discomfort white people feel when listening to people who have faced these systemic issues firsthand. I've spoken with a lot of my white mates about the topic of Indigenous education and Indigenous discussion, and a lot of them just don't want to think about it. And yeah, it's kind of fucked in a sense, because no one really talks about this stuff in Australia. They just kind of go about their day. And yeah, I can empathise here. It's a collective suck to be reminded the place, the home that you enjoyed is built on the bones of a destroyed people. I just want to say, even if you personally didn't do wrong, we all still benefit from the status quo. Do you... I've just got written here, what's your thoughts on ScoMo?
ScoMo. Unfortunately, the last few years, as a nation, I think we've gone backwards.
So not a fan of ScoMo. I mean, who is? Part 3. The West, the best. A lot of Australian politicians talk about Australian values, but what do they mean by that? Well, we know what they mean. They don't mean the values of Indigenous Australians, or say any other group of the diverse populace. Their values are stemming from the colonial worldview. They want society on their terms. I'll be honest with you, I think that's kind of bullshit. Michael highlighted a really interesting point that I want to share with you right now. In Australia's national anthem, there's a line that goes, "We are young and free." Michael points out the fact that Australia as a country isn't that young, and it's quite an old and ancient history. And I think it would be better if we had a cultural identity acknowledging and knowing the fact that Australia has a long and proud history. Australia has been here for thousands of years, and it's going to be here for thousands of more years. And I'll be honest, that's a history I'm a hell of a lot more proud of. I just want to propose the idea of cultivating a better Indigenous-friendly Australian identity. I'm not saying to throw out Lamingtons and Woolies iced coffee and replace it all with like bush tucker food. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying incorporating something old and ancient can help this imagined society of Australianness move forward. I know a lot of people have views on patriotism and their relations with their national identity. Many people love and some people hate the concept. Kawaii smart vegan commie waifu Mexi has brought up the idea of completely getting rid of the concept altogether. While I agree with a lot of what she says, I don't think we should get rid of all of it. I think there's some good stuff there. I feel like we should go about cultivating a better national identity. Also, while I'm here talking about Mexi, my DMs are always open, so if you ever wanna chat Mexi up... What the fuck am I doing? What am I doing? Oh my god, I even put a winky face on my script. Am I seriously trying to flirt with a girl through a fucking video essay? What the fuck is wrong with me? Why did I even... Oh, what the fuck am I doing with my life, dude? Please, no one send this to her. I'm probably gonna cut this whole part. Let me introduce you to two juxtaposing I can't believe I just tried to like hit on a girl, just like through a video essay. Like, what the fuck? Who does that? Hey girl, DMs are always open, man. Let me introduce you to two juxtaposing concepts, ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism. Currently, with King Dick, Micropenis, ScoMo in charge, Australia in the past year has shifted closer to ethnocentrism. Within sociology, ethnocentrism is the worldview that one's own culture is better than everyone else's. These are our values: assimilate or get out. Love it or leave it. Many Western cultures are guilty of this, the biggest of course being that wasteland once known as America.
Australia's not inclusive.
Okay.
It's a little bit exclusive.
It's a lot of
there's
it's,
a lot of
yeah.
There's a lot of people not sitting at the table that should be at the table. You know?
Okay. Now, opposing this, ethno-relativism is the acquired societal ability to see many values and behaviors as cultural rather than universal. No one's culture is superior to another. It's kind of the opposite to assimilation. Rather than being incorporated into the societal status quo, ethno-relativism is about acceptance, adaptation, and integration. Acknowledging the country's colonial history of damage and working to incorporate a wider net that embraces everyone to move forward and be better. Ethno-relativism is about adaptation instead of assimilation. If you take one thing away from this video, it's to have a ethno-relativistic view on the world and culture, rather than an ethnocentric one. If it wasn't clear, I love talking about these sort of divisive topics. The problem in doing so is that people nowadays are so abrasive with cultural discussion. I love having discussions about race, gender, and society, but I can't mention words like white privilege or racism or systemic issues without people just putting their fingers in their ears and yelling la 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 and just completely walking away from the discussion. I really want to be challenged on my position. I want to hear the other side of the argument. At time of recording, no one from the opposition has properly engaged with my videos on a quote-unquote intellectual level. No one has really engaged with the points I've raised. The most people can muster is childish name-calling and bad faith arguments. I want to have this sort of discourse in good faith. I personally believe why no one has engaged with my points on the intellectual level yet is because my points are made out of such bulletproof facts and logic. Like, I'm just a titan of I am just a titan of reason and intellectual analysis. I'm a smart boy, you know. I'm a genius. What I'm getting at here is when dark web intellectuals and conservative types run their mouth about how great Western civilization is, it kind of makes me uneasy. Because is it really? Because the points they use aren't really about the status quo. They're about this imaginatory, idealized version that is retrospectively constructed. And it's not real, but it could be real. I feel like they're missing a part of that picture there. When political inspirations like Jordan, he looks like Jerry Seinfeld but sounds like Kermit the Frog Peterson comes out and says, "The fundamental assumption of Western civilization is valid. How about that?" I can't help but call bullshit. What? The assumptions men held when they slaughtered hundreds and thousands of people are valid? No. The assumptions people made to justify the land theft is valid? No. The assumptions people held when they implemented these destructive systems are valid? No. The assumption that believing your nation is the best gives you the right to be a massive cunt under the guise of free speech? God no. I used to agree with the lobster doctor about the West being valid, but after looking at the facts and seeing history through multiple perspectives, I don't know if it is. I don't even know if it's an actual valid concept in itself, the West. But hey, when people talk about the decline of Western civilization, that is a self-made prophecy. The ethnocentric outlook of the West is the best doesn't have any longevity. You can't be the best forever. In my opinion, there's no reason that Australia cannot achieve more. How about we cultivate a better ethnic, national, and cultural identity? I personally feel lucky in relation to my own cultural identity. I predominantly grew up with the white side of my family. They never really mentioned race or made me feel other. Even in the cases where it was brought up, it was handled very well. Shoutouts to my white grandma, she's always really super sweet and never made me feel alienated. I'm proud to be part of this imagined community of Australianness. I'm proud of what this country means to me, and I think it has a capacity to make everyone feel proud and good about themselves, proud about who they are. While it's still leagues ahead of that ash pile once known as America, Australia still has a ways to go. Anyway, welcome to the end of the video. I just want to say thanks for making it to the end. Follow me on Twitter at pixel_hipster. Anyway, first up, my $10 a month Patreons. Love you guys. These are my Patreon sick cunts. Barely Contained, Deus Ex Caffeina, and Michael Grims. Okay, so I'm doing this new thing at the end of the Patreon where people in the $5 or above tier get to ask me a question, and I'm going to answer it on the end credit sort of thing. And I think I'm really excited about this. Super. So yeah, everyone on the Patreon, feel free to just like at me questions and I'll answer them at the end. Okay, Dominic asks, have you ever cooperated with someone on a video? Who would your dream person to cooperate with be? I recently did a bit of VC voiceover work for Peter Coffin's new very important documentary sort of thing, so that's sort of a collab sort of thing. My dream is to collab with Philosophy Tube, like Ollie. I think he's like amazing, and he's kind of like my husbando senpai, and like I really look up to him, so that would be a dream come true. Like maybe, of course, like Nat from ContraPoints or like Harry from HMO Guy would be very good. I also would like to collab with like Super Eye Patch Wolf, but I know he doesn't really do sort of collab sort of thing. Also, this is like a weird pipe dream. Unironically, I would really like to be like on InfoWars. Like I know that's not really a video, but I just want to like be in Alex Jones's presence and just like collab with him. I don't know. Rory brackets everybody talks asks, coffee or tea? If you guys didn't know this about me, I'm a barista, so I've worked a lot with coffee, and I feel like that's kind of ruined the whole taste for me. I personally don't really like drinking coffee as anymore. I'm more of a hot chocolate person, but if I had to choose between coffee and tea, definitely tea. Especially Japanese matcha tea is very good, like green tea. I really like green tea. I actually drink a lot of green tea now I think about it. Anyway, so that's the Patreon stuff. Thank you everyone on Patreon. If you want to see your name next to everyone here, just go support me there. I'm not monetized, so that's like the only place where I get any revenue, so thanks. See you guys in the next video.
Hello everyone, Jordan Peterson here. I just want to say, I really like having sex with lobsters. I just want to get in there and give it to them with my capitalist penis. Jordan Peterson, 12 rules, masculinity has been chased out of the West, and it's up to me, personally, to save masculinity.
In all seriousness, I hope Mr. Peterson is alright. No disrespect, I'm actually a fan. I hope everything surrounding his situation relating to his rehab and his wife's health is getting better. Much love, Lobster Doctor. Hope you're doing good.